Let's get right into it. Number 10. Gamers beat the Biochemists. Picture a problem so stubborn that a lab full of trained scientists chewed on it for roughly a decade and got nowhere. That was the shape of a protein-cutting enzyme from the Mason-Pfizer monkey virus, a retrovirus in the same family as HIV. Enzymes work like keys, and the entire point of drug design is carving something that jams the lock. But you cannot carve a key when nobody can agree what the lock looks like. Proteins are long floppy chains that crumple into one specific 3D shape, and the number of ways a chain can crumple is somewhere between astronomical and please stop asking dates. So in 2011, researchers at the University of Washington did something that sounds like a bad pitch meeting. They handed the problem to a video game. Fold-It turns protein folding into a puzzle where you tug, wiggle, and shake a chain until the score goes up. The players were not biochemists. They were people with jobs and hobbies and an itch for a good puzzle, mostly working in teams, trading tricks the way speedrunners trade shortcuts. They cracked it in about 3 weeks. The resulting model was accurate enough to publish, and it landed in Nature Structural and Molecular Biology with the players listed as co-authors, an entire group of anonymous gamers credited in a scientific journal, not as a cute footnote, as authors. Here's the uncomfortable part. The humans did not outcompute the computers or the professionals, they out-intuited them. Software optimizes by grinding. People look at a tangled shape and think that flap should tuck under there, because your brain has spent your whole life estimating whether the couch fits through the door. 10 years of expertise lost to a species-wide gift for spatial vibes. Somewhere out there is a person who helped decode a viral enzyme and still can't fold a fitted sheet. Number 9. The housewife who broke geometry. In 1975, a San Diego mother of 5 picked up her son's copy of Scientific American and read Martin Gardner's column about tiling the plane with pentagons, the question of which 5-sided shapes can cover a flat surface forever with no gaps and no overlaps. Squares do it. Triangles do it. Hexagons famously do it, which is why bees look organized. Pentagons are the awkward middle child of tiling, and mathematicians had spent decades slowly assembling a list of the ones that work. The column reported that the list was, at last, probably complete. Marjorie Rice had a high school education in mathematics. No degree, no department, no colleagues. What she had was a kitchen table, a stack of paper, and an annoying suspicion that probably complete is not the same as complete. She invented her own notation because she didn't know the professional one existed. She drew pentagons in the margins and hid the work when visitors came by, the way other people hide a diary. And between 1976 and 1977, she found 4 new types of pentagon that tile the plane. 4 shapes that professional mathematicians, working with the actual vocabulary of the field, had walked straight past. Nobody believed a homemaker had done it until a mathematician sat down with her diagrams and confirmed every single one. Her tilings ended up in academic papers and eventually tiled into the floor of a mathematical association's building. Rice kept working on the problem for years afterward, still without a title, still without a salary, still without anyone's permission. The complete pentagon list wasn't finished until 2017, proven by a computer search decades after a woman with no training added a quarter of the known catalog on her own. Turns out the fastest way to find something everyone missed is to not know that everyone already looked. Number 8, the teacher who found a ghost. In 2007, astronomers had a data problem, which is a polite way of saying they had a mountain of galaxy images and not nearly enough eyeballs. So Galaxy Zoo threw the pile on the internet and asked ordinary people to sort galaxies by shape. A Dutch schoolteacher named Hanny van Arkel started clicking through images in her spare time, mostly because a musician she liked had mentioned the project. A few thousand galaxies in, she hit something that didn't belong. A glowing green blob sitting underneath a galaxy called IC 2497. Not a galaxy, not a star. Just a smear of eerie green, nothing with a hole in the middle. She posted it on the project forum and asked what it was. Nobody knew, which from a room full of astrophysicists is a fairly loud answer. It got the name Hanny's Voorwerp, Dutch for Hanny's object, because apparently even cosmic mysteries get a placeholder file name. Telescopes turned toward it, Hubble photographed it, and the explanation that came back is genuinely haunting. The green glow is a colossal cloud of gas, roughly the size of an entire galaxy, being lit up by a quasar, an enormously bright blast of energy from a feeding supermassive black hole. Except the quasar isn't there anymore. It shut off. The cloud is glowing from light that left tens of thousands of years ago and is only now arriving, like a room still lit by a bulb that burned out before you were born. Astronomers had effectively caught a black hole's afterimage. It gave them a rare look at how fast these monsters can switch off, a timescale that had been mostly theoretical. Professional surveys had that image, algorithms had processed it. It took a schoolteacher clicking through pictures on her couch to notice the ghost sitting in plain sight. Number 7, a sky thing named Steve. Aurora chasers are a specific breed of person. They drive into the freezing dark at 2 a.m. on a maybe, stand in a field in Alberta, and point expensive cameras at the sky while everyone they love is asleep in a warm bed. And starting around 2015, a Facebook group of them kept photographing something that wasn't supposed to exist. It was a long, thin ribbon of purple-white light running east to west, sitting much further south than auroras normally bother to go. It didn't wave like a curtain. It didn't glow green. Sometimes a row of green vertical stripes marched alongside it like a picket fence. The chasers assumed it was a known thing with a boring official name, so they gave it a placeholder joke name from a cartoon, Steve. Then a scientist from the University of Calgary looked at their photos and had to admit that nobody in his field had a name for it either. So they kept Steve. They just reverse engineered a respectable acronym around it, Strong Thermal Emission Velocity Enhancement, which is the scientific equivalent of pretending you meant to do that. In 2018, researchers matched the amateurs' time-stamped photos with a European Space Agency satellite that happened to fly straight through one. The readings were absurd. A ribbon of gas about 25 kilometers wide, heated to roughly 3,000 degrees Celsius, ripping westward at around 6 kilometers per second, while the air beside it sat there doing nothing. Later work found the glow isn't produced the way auroras are produced at all. It's a genuinely different mechanism, hot enough and fast enough to count as its own phenomenon. People had been photographing Steve for decades. Old images exist. Nobody had ever grouped them, compared them, and asked the obvious question out loud because everyone assumed a professional somewhere had already handled it. An entire category of sky missed by science and found by a group chat of cold hobbyists who named it after a hedge cartoon. Number 6, the digger they erased. Lyme Regis in the early 1800s was a seaside town with crumbling cliffs and a working-class girl who sold fossils to tourists to keep her family fed. Mary Anning had almost no formal schooling. She taught herself anatomy, geology, and enough French to read scientific papers, then taught herself to hand copy those papers because she couldn't afford them. What she pulled out of those cliffs rewrote the planet's biography. The first correctly identified ichthyosaur skeleton, the first complete plesiosaur, the first pterosaur found outside Germany. She worked storm-battered cliff faces in winter when landslides expose new bone and also inconveniently bury the person collecting it. A landslide killed her dog while she was working beside it. Here's the part that should make your jaw tighten. When she uncovered the plesiosaur, a creature with a neck so long it looked like a design error, the specimen went to Georges Cuvier in Paris, the most respected anatomist alive. He declared it a fake, bones from different animals glued together by a clever fraud, obviously. He was wrong. He was publicly, comprehensively wrong, and he had to say so. A self-taught fossil hunter with no institution behind her had found a real animal that the greatest expert in the field refused to believe was possible. She also worked out what the strange stones in the ichthyosaur guts actually were. Fossilized feces, which meant you could reconstruct what extinct animals had eaten for lunch. That single insight opened a whole branch of the field. Meanwhile, the men who bought her specimens published them, took the credit, and named the species. She could not join the Geological Society of London because women could not join. She was not permitted to formally present anything she had personally dragged out of the ground. The expert she outdug wrote her out of the papers. The Cliffs never got that memo. Number 5, the king under the car park. Richard III lost at Bosworth in 1485, and after that, the historical record gets vague in a very English way. The dominant story held that his bones had been dug up during the Reformation and dumped in the River Soar. Case closed, gentlemen. Back to the pub. Whatever was left of a king of England was mud in a river, and that had been the professional consensus for centuries. Philippa Langley was a screenwriter, not a historian, not an archaeologist, a member of an enthusiast society who had become slightly obsessed with the man while researching a script. She dug through old maps and records and became convinced the friary where he was buried had never actually been in the river's general direction at all, and that its footprint sat under modern Leicester, specifically under a social services car park. She raised the funding herself, largely from other amateurs because that pitch does not survive a normal grant committee, and she reported something she knew sounded ridiculous. Standing in that car park, she felt strongly that he was beneath a particular parking space. A space with a letter R painted on the tarmac. R for reserved. They broke ground in August 2012. In the first trench on the first day, they hit human leg bones. The skeleton had a severely curved spine, matching the crookback descriptions everyone had assumed were Tudor propaganda, plus battlefield wounds, and a caved skull. In 2013, DNA from the bones was matched to a living descendant of Richard's sister, a Canadian-born cabinet maker living in London. The identification held up. A hobbyist with a hunch and a rented digger found a lost king of England on day one of a dig that professionals had never bothered to attempt under a parking spot marked R. You cannot write that. Someone would tell you it's too much. Number 4, the testimony nobody wanted. In 1845, Sir John Franklin sailed into the Arctic with 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, 129 men, and the full confidence of the British Empire. All of it vanished. What followed was one of the largest search efforts of the century. Dozens of expeditions, decades of money, and a national obsession with what happened out there on the ice. The answer was available almost immediately. Nobody wanted it. In 1854, John Rae collected detailed accounts from Inuit hunters who described starving men dragging boats south and evidence that the last survivors had resorted to cannibalism. The Inuit had been unambiguous and specific. Back in London, the reaction was not gratitude. Charles Dickens took to print to attack the credibility of the witnesses outright, on essentially no grounds beyond who they were. Rae's career took the damage. The testimony was filed under unreliable. Meanwhile, Inuit oral history kept the details alive for over 150 years. Where the ships had been, that one sank in deeper water further south, that a mast had once stuck up through the ice in a particular bay. In 2014, Erebus was found in Wilmot and Crampton Bay, matching Inuit accounts almost exactly. 2 years later, the search for Terror got a tip from Sammy Kogvik, an Inuk ranger aboard the search vessel, who mentioned that years earlier he'd seen a wooden pole jutting out of the sea ice in Terror Bay. The team diverted. The ship was sitting there, largely intact, hatches sealed, in remarkably good condition. A century and a half of expensive expeditions by trained naval officers, and both wrecks were found essentially by finally listening to people who had been giving directions the entire time. The mystery was never that hard. The experts just decided in advance whose knowledge counted as knowledge. Number 3, the architect who cracked linear BU. In 1936, a 14-year-old English schoolboy attended a lecture by the archaeologist Arthur Evans about a script found on clay tablets in Crete. Thousands of years old, thousands of tablets, completely unreadable. Every serious scholar who'd attacked it had failed. The boy asked whether it had been deciphered yet. Told no, he apparently decided that was a personal matter. Michael Ventris grew up to become an architect. Code-breaking was his hobby, the thing he did instead of relaxing. He circulated questionnaires to scholars asking what they thought the language might be, compiled the answers, and got to work with the arrogance of a man with nothing professional to lose. He built on real groundwork, and it's worth saying so. The classicist Alice Kober had done painstaking work identifying grammatical patterns in the script, cataloging evidence on hand-cut index cards stored in cigarette cartons because she couldn't get paper during the war. She died before finishing. Ventris built a grid mapping the symbols by their probable consonants and vowels, then started testing place names. And the answer that came out was the one thing everyone had ruled out. Evans, the great authority on Minoan Crete, had spent his life insisting the language was not Greek. It was Greek, an archaic, clunky, very early Greek, pushing the written history of the language back centuries. Ventris announced it on BBC Radio in 1952, then teamed up with the philologist John Chadwick to nail it down properly. He died in a car crash in 1956, aged 34, having handed the world an entire lost era of literacy that he decoded on evenings and weekends. An amateur solved it precisely because he was willing to test the answer the expert had forbidden. Number 2, the retiree who caught a serial killer. Between the mid-1970s and 1986, one man committed dozens of rapes and at least 13 murders across California, then simply stopped. Detectives worked the case for 40 years. They had his DNA. They had nothing to match it to, because he had never been arrested, and a DNA profile with no match is just a very expensive shrug. The break didn't come from a lab or a bureau, it came from a hobby. GEDmatch is a genealogy site built by hobbyists, where people upload their consumer DNA results to find distant cousins, a database created so retirees could fill in family trees. Investigators uploaded the killer's crime scene profile to it, and the people who knew how to actually use that data were amateur genealogists. Barbara Rae-Venter was a retired patent attorney who had taken up genetic genealogy after retiring. She had already used the technique to identify an unknown murder victim and expose a man who had been living under stolen names for decades. Now she was building family trees backwards from third and fourth cousins, people who had no idea a killer was on their branch, narrowing millions of candidates to a handful of families, then to one. In April 2018, police arrested Joseph James D'Angelo, a former police officer, at his home in Citrus Heights. He later pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life without parole. 40 years of professional investigation ended because a retiree with a genealogy habit knew how to read a cousin match. Somewhere in that family tree is a person who spat in a tube for fun and accidentally closed one of the coldest cases in America. Number 1. The Cipher that beat the FBI. In 1969, a killer operating around the San Francisco Bay Area sent to newspapers a coded message. 438 symbols, split into 3 pieces, with a promise of more killing if it wasn't printed. Professional cryptanalysts got involved, military and federal codebreakers, the people whose entire job is breaking enemy communications, went at it. They were beaten inside a week by a high school history teacher named Donald Hardin and his wife Betty, working at home in Salinas. Betty's insight was almost insultingly simple. An egomaniac writing about himself would probably start with, "I like killing people." She guessed the opening. The whole thing unraveled from there. It did start with exactly that. Then came the second one, 340 symbols sent that November, and this one held. It survived 51 years. It survived the FBI, the NSA, professional cryptographers, obsessive hobbyists, and every crank with a theory and a printer. It became the most famous unsolved cipher in modern criminal history. In December 2020, it fell to 3 men who had never been hired to do anything of the sort: an American web developer, a Belgian warehouse logistics worker who had spent years writing his own code-breaking software in his spare time, and an Australian mathematician. The trick was that the cipher wasn't just scrambled, it was written diagonally, in a shifted pattern, with the writer's own spelling errors baked in. They ran the possibilities until the words surfaced. The FBI confirmed the solution, and the message itself, taunting, smug. It mocked the police for chasing him, and revealed absolutely nothing about who he was. 51 years, every professional agency in the country, cracked by a warehouse worker's homemade software on a hobbyist's laptop. The greatest codebreakers of a generation lost to 3 guys in a group chat. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.